He didn't want trouble. He only wanted to hold an old rifle, one he'd carried long ago, before most of them were even born. But the clerk laughed at his questions, mocked his limp, called him Grandpa, and told him to leave. The old man didn't argue. He left quietly, as he always had, step by step. What the clerk didn't know was that the name on that man's dog tag still meant something. And exactly 1 hour later, a Navy SEAL team pulled into the parking lot. No sirens, no warnings, just a dozen men marching in step, completely silent, entering the shop with one question: where is he? Welcome to Human Stories. Before we dive into this powerful tale of disrespect, loyalty, and redemption, leave a comment below. What city are you watching this from today? And if you believe real warriors never forget their brothers, hit the subscribe button. These stories matter. The gun shop sat on the edge of town, wedged between a bait shop and a hardware warehouse. Its windows were tinted just enough to hint at authority. Inside, rifles lined the walls like trophies, and glass cases displayed pistols so polished they almost seemed unreal. Behind the counter, 2 young clerks leaned over their phones, half distracted by the faint hum of country music drifting from ceiling speakers. The shop wasn't busy, didn't need to be. It was the kind of place that made its money on image. At exactly 10:43 a.m., the front door chimed. The man who entered didn't draw attention. He was just there in a way that made everything around him a little quieter. Worn boots, jeans with a patch at the knee, a brown leather jacket older than half the staff. His face was weathered but calm, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of a faded Navy SEAL cap. He moved slowly but with purpose, his limp noticeable but never pitiful. He didn't look around. He went straight to the counter, placed a hand gently on the glass, and waited. One of the clerks looked up, flashing a forced smile. "Need something, sir?" The old man nodded once. "Yeah, I was wondering if you still have that M1 Gare and replica on the back wall, the one with the real wood stock." The clerk blinked. "That's a collector's item, not something you'd actually shoot." "I didn't ask if I could shoot it," the man said calmly. "I just want to hold it for a moment. Haven't touched one in decades." The second clerk, slightly older, chimed in with a laugh. "That rifle's heavier than it looks, Grandpa. Might be a bit much for your back." The old man didn't smile. "I carried one through the jungle," he said. "I can manage it in this showroom." The mood shifted. The first clerk laughed too loudly. "Okay, Rambo, if you're not buying, you're just clogging up the shop. Let the real customers in." The second added, "Yeah, this isn't a museum." The old man paused. For a moment it seemed like he might say something, correct them, remind them who he was. But instead he lowered his gaze to the counter, nodded to himself, and said only, "Understood." Then he turned, walked to the door, and left. No argument, no anger, no demand to speak to the manager. Just a man alone again, walking slowly to the edge of a country that had forgotten what some men had sacrificed for it. Inside, the clerks went back to scrolling their phones. Neither noticed the woman by the ammunition shelf, wearing a gym shirt from the early 2000s, her baseball cap pulled low. She'd watched the scene silently. 2 minutes later, she slipped outside, pulled a phone from her pocket, and made a single call. She said 3 words: "He was here." By 11:43 a.m., the parking lot began to fill not with customers. A matte black SUV pulled up and parked near the entrance, its engine idling. A minute later, another arrived. Then a third. No music, no movement, just the hum of silent machines with dark windows and unreadable intentions. Inside, the clerks were still joking, still scrolling, oblivious to the shift in the air outside. Then the doors opened 3 at once. 12 men stepped out. Their movements were calm, unhurried, but they carried a weight that made people pause. They weren't loud, they didn't shout. Yet something about their presence made the air feel heavier. Some wore civilian clothes, others faded uniforms. Most didn't need either their posture, their eyes, the way they scanned the street out of habit, not nerves, betrayed who they were. They crossed the sidewalk silently and entered the shop one by one. The door's chime sounded faint, and even that felt different. Not a word was spoken. They fanned out quietly in a semicircle in front of the counter. The younger clerk, perched on a stool behind the register, barely looked up from his phone. "Welcome, gentlemen. Looking for something specific today," he said with little interest. Then he glanced up and froze. 12 men stood there, their gazes locked on him. The oldest, gray, haired with a square jaw, his chest heavy with ribbons and an unmistakable seal trident, stepped forward. "1 hour ago," he said calmly, "one of ours walked through that door." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit like a hammer. The second clerk, who'd made the earlier joke, cleared his throat, visibly uneasy. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." The SEAL cut him off with a look. "He didn't come here to be honored," he continued. "He didn't want recognition. He just wanted to see a rifle he hadn't touched since Vietnam. Your staff laughed, called him Grandpa, told him to get out. You didn't ask who he was. You didn't care." He placed something on the counter, a worn, folded flag patch, sunken with age. "He pulled this off my uniform when I was bleeding out in Helmand. He carried me out on foot 22 hours, no radio, no backup, a fist-sized hole in his side. He never talked about it, never expected thanks. But when he came here today, you treated him like a problem." The younger clerk swallowed hard, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes darting to the door as if he might run. The SEAL didn't move. "We're not here for revenge. We don't want an apology. But he won't speak for himself, so we're speaking for him." Another SEAL stepped forward and placed a photo on the glass. 8 men, arms over each other's shoulders, covered in dust, sunburned but smiling. The man in the center, younger then, unmistakable now, was the same one they'd mocked an hour ago. The clerk's mouth opened slightly. I didn't know." The lead SEAL nodded slowly. "Exactly. You didn't ask. No threats, no demands, just truth." Then the first man turned, the others followed, and 12 men left the shop as they'd entered, without fanfare, without words, leaving only a silence no bullet could ever match. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, more out of instinct than curiosity. Phones were raised, not to film, but to capture, as if someone might forget what this felt like. The SEALs took no notice, didn't need to. They climbed into their vehicles and drove off one by one, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Inside the shop, the air didn't return to normal. The clerk sat slowly, staring at the photo in front of him. For the first time, he realized he hadn't just sent an old man away. He'd sent history away, and now the world would know who they'd really asked to leave. By 1:45 p.m. The photo was going viral in 3 veteran Facebook groups. A customer who'd entered the shop shortly after the SEALs arrived had snapped it. 12 men, perfectly still in the gun shop, all facing the counter where 2 clerks stood frozen. No fists, no shouting, just silence and a presence too powerful to ignore. The caption was simple: "When you disrespect one SEAL, you get them all." At first, many didn't understand the context. The post was shared and reshared, often with just an American flag emoji. Then someone asked who was the old man they stood for. And from there, everything changed. By 2:12 p.m., a name appeared in the comments: James C. Beckett, a man seen around town for years, but who rarely spoke, always polite, always alone, wearing the same worn SEAL Team 3 cap every day. No one had ever asked what it meant. Until now, one commenter wrote, "He was my uncle's CO in '99, saved 3 men in Panama, never talked about it afterward." Another added, "If that's Beckett, we're talking about a ghost, the kind you only hear about in mission briefings, never on the news." Someone dug up a blurry, scanned personnel file buried deep in a military archive and posted it alongside the photo. Master Chief Special Warfare Operator James Charles Beckett, SEAL Team 3, enlisted 1966, retired 2004, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart, multiple unlisted commendations. Deployments: Vietnam, Mogadishu, Panama, Iraq. Over 35 confirmed personnel extractions from hostile zones. No autobiography, no press, no interviews. Just decades of silence, decades of getting the job done by 3:00 p.m. The local news station had picked up the story under a simple headline, Silent Visit. 12 Navy SEALs visit gun shop to support veteran. The article wasn't sensational. Just facts. A man came in. He was asked to leave. An hour later, a team arrived. And suddenly, a quiet, overlooked figure became a symbol of everything people had forgotten to respect. Inside the shop, the silence lingered. The clerks hadn't spoken to each other in over an hour. On the counter sat the photo left by the SEALs, 8 men in a black and white desert group shot, muddy, sunburned, young, but with hard eyes. Beckett stood in the center, arms crossed, a half-mile that said nothing and everything. Customers who came later didn't ask for ammo or gear. They asked who the man in the photo was. They asked if he'd come back. One older customer, a Gulf War Marine veteran, stood before the photo for a full minute, saluted and left without a word. By 4:00 p.m., a veteran run publication had posted a short piece titled, "Those Who Stand When You're Gone." Its final line would be quoted thousands of times in the days to come. James Beckett didn't need to speak. His silence was carried by 12 voices who chose to stay silent too. The store manager, pale, arrived with his phone in hand, still processing what had happened. The photo had been sent to him twice before he even pulled into the lot. The sunken flag patch left on the counter remained untouched. He didn't reprimand the clerks. He didn't even speak to them. He simply walked to the display case, pulled out the M1 Gare, and the old man had wanted to see, and placed it beside the photo. Then he took a sheet of paper, wrote a single line by hand, and slipped it into a clear frame next to the rifle. He carried it once. Now we carry the memory. Outside the shop, someone had left a single white flower by the door. Then a challenge coin. Then a folded piece of paper with one word, "Respect." By nightfall, a small crowd had gathered. Some came to pay their respects. Others just wanted to see the place where something real had happened. There were no protests, no slogans, no outrage, just silence. A reverent hush that said more than 1,000 headlines ever could. As for Beckett himself, he didn't respond to the coverage. He posted nothing, gave no interviews. He didn't even know the Wave building behind him online. He went home the way he'd come, unnoticed. But for the first time in years, when someone passed him on the sidewalk, they didn't look through him. They looked twice, because now the town knew exactly who they'd asked to leave and who had answered instead. In the days that followed, something shifted in the town. Not dramatically, not publicly, but deeply. The gun shop, once just another store with a register and racks of tactical gear, became something else. It wasn't about weapons anymore, it was about memory. People didn't come to shop. They came to reflect. Veterans stepped through the door, not with shopping lists but with stories. Some left patches from their own units beside Beckett's photo. Others asked quietly, "Is he okay?" No one really knew. The truth was, James Beckett hadn't changed his routine. He still walked 2 miles every morning before the sun got too high. He still stopped at the same corner diner for black coffee, no sugar, and he still sat alone in the back booth, a seat no one ever shared. Not once did he mention the day he was asked to leave, or the men who showed up for him. Not to the waitress, not to the cook, not even to the old Marine who sometimes nodded to him from across the room. But people noticed anyway. When a local high school invited veterans to speak in history class, Beckett didn't respond. But a week later, the principal received an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter describing a rescue mission in 1970, no name, no signature, just a map reference and the names of the 6 men he'd saved. The letter was framed without comment and hung in the school hallway. At the gun shop, the sunken patch was kept in the display case. The owner, who hadn't been there that day, had it encased in glass. Beside it, he added a simple inscription, for the man we didn't recognize and the brothers who didn't let us forget. The story spread through veteran forums, then talk radio, and quietly in political meetings no one reported on. Because what happened that day wasn't a protest, it wasn't a fight. It was something rarer. Men standing for one of their own without saying a word. And the message landed. 2 weeks later, the SEAL team returned not to the shop, but to Beckett's diner. They didn't take a table. They didn't make a scene. They simply walked in one by one and stood silently by his booth as he sipped his coffee. He looked up, met their eyes, and for a moment no one breathed. Then the youngest, who hadn't even been born when Beckett retired, spoke. "Sir, if it's all right with you, we'd like to sit with you." Beckett nodded once. They filled the booth without another word. For the next hour no one in the diner heard a sound, but everyone remembered the silence because it spoke louder than anything else. Some men don't need a title to be respected. They don't demand recognition. They don't raise their voice. They just do what needs to be done and fade back into the silence. Chief James Beckett didn't come to prove anything. He wasn't there to be acknowledged, thanked, or reminded he was important. He already knew who he was. What mattered was that his team knew too that they hadn't forgotten him, that when the world grew small and quiet, they showed up not with outrage but with presence. That's loyalty. That's brotherhood. That's the code not printed on plaques or shouted in politics, but carried quietly, mission after mission. Most people wouldn't have noticed the man with the limp and the faded cap. But 12 SEALs did, and now so do we. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Chief Beckett? Someone who served, who never asked for praise, never told their story, but changed lives anyway? Write their name in the comments. Share how they lived. Say the things they'd never say themselves, because they deserve to be remembered. And if this story moved you, subscribe. Welcome to Human Stories. We're here to make sure men like Beckett are never invisible again. Their silence was earned. Now it's time we speak for them. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, if you ever see an old man standing quietly in a shop, a diner, or a classroom, don't ask what he's done. Just give him space, because he's already done it.